The backlash is coming, by the way, with regard to the Black Lives Matter movement's propaganda about police. The backlash is coming because it turns out that crime rates have been rising dramatically around the United States. The U.S., according to CNN, saw a significant crime rise across major cities in 2020. According to CNN, major American cities saw a 33% increase in homicide last year. Okay, that is because of the attempt to absolutely hamstring the cops and make it impossible for them to do their jobs. You think people are going to go along to get along on these particular issues? Tom Cotton is getting dragged through the mud, the senator from Arkansas, because he tweeted out we have a major under-incarceration problem in America and it's getting worse. And people are like, well, yeah, we already incarcerate a lot of people. The question isn't how many people we incarcerate. The question is how many of those people are innocent. Answer, not a lot. And how many people who are guilty are out walking the streets? Answer, some. There's a very simple question to ask when it comes to under-incarceration versus over-incarceration. It is not percentage of people incarcerated. It's percentage of people who committed crimes in jail. That's the only question I care about. If you committed a murder, I don't care if we have more people in jail than other countries. You should be in jail. You committed a murder. So Tom Cotton on the numbers is correct. If there's a 33% increase in homicide, that means too few people are in jail. At least when it comes to homicide. Okay, but it doesn't matter because, again, the left can't stop itself. In corporate America, that ship can't be turned. In the media, they cannot re-steer themselves because they've dedicated themselves to activism. The Biden administration can't turn away from its own radicalism. And in the criminal justice system, the Black Lives Matter movement can't steer away from its own radicalism. This is how you end up with videos of BLM activists saying that cities will burn if Derek Chauvin isn't convicted. How do you think this is going to play? You think it's going to play in America? You think this is really going to go well for you? Here is this BLM activist.
If George Floyd's murderer is not sentenced, just know that all hell is going to break loose. Don't be surprised when buildings are on fire.
Okay, so here's the thing. As I've been pointing out this whole time, and I think most people who have a brain are noticing, is that this Chauvin case is not clear-cut. Not only is it not clear-cut, yesterday happened to be a particularly bad day for the prosecution in the Derek Chauvin murder case with regard to George Floyd. There are a bunch of witnesses who were interviewed yesterday, and it did not turn out well for the prosecution. In fact, it turned out so not well for the prosecution that one of the witnesses the prosecution called, the defense announced they wanted to recall the witness as a defense witness. That's how badly it went for the prosecution. You know the prosecution is doing a crappy job when they call a witness, and the defense cross-examines the guy. And they're like, you know what? We like you so much, we want you back on our side. Like, that ain't good. The state called a Minneapolis Police Department lieutenant named Johnny Mercil, who's a use-of-force trainer. And the prosecution asked him a bunch of questions about whether Chauvin was using approved use-of-force procedures. But then Eric Nelson, who is the defense attorney, began asking questions related to Mercil's time as a street cop. This is according to legalinsurrection.com, who's been doing a good job analyzing this on a day-to-day level. Nelson asked questions related to Mercil's time as a street cop, with a particular emphasis on the tendencies of suspects being subject to arrest to come up with all kinds of nonsense about why they shouldn't be arrested that day. Dangerous job being a police officer. Yes. Are people unhappy about being arrested? Very rarely are they happy, said Mercil. Do suspects frequently engage in a wide variety of behaviors to avoid arrest, including fighting, arguing, and making excuses? Yes, they do, answered Mercil. Indeed, when asked if he himself had ever disbelieved a suspect's claim of a medical emergency in an apparent effort to avoid arrest, Mercil answered he had personally done so. All of this undercuts the part of the prosecution narrative that is relying on Floyd's purported pleas and excuses about claustrophobia and anxiety and crying out for his mother. Perhaps that's real, but a reasonable officer has to consider maybe it's an effort to avoid arrest. Nelson also, once again, put the use of pressure and body weight techniques in a favorable light. The state wants to present Chauvin's knee in a negative light, as deadly mechanical asphyxiation or as a blood choke, as attested to by this other witness, Derek Williams. In fact, however, the use of pressure and body weight to restrain a suspect was adopted by the MPD because it was a less intense use of force than prior practice of using strikes, either barehanded or with batons or even with weighted gloves, to compel compliance. Mercil concurred. The take-home message for the jury is that Chauvin's knee, far from being a public execution in a public street, was a lesser force than would otherwise have been required. So, bottom line is this prosecution is not particularly going well for the prosecution. Nelson explored with Mercil whether there were circumstances in which it would be appropriate for an officer to maintain a neck restraint for a substantial period of time. Mercil said yes. Sometimes to maintain the neck restraint for however long it took EMS to arrive, asked Nelson. Mercil answered that he personally had maintained restraint on suspects for the duration required for EMS to arrive. The state's own use of force expert testified on cross he personally had engaged in the exact same activity that Chauvin is currently being demonized for. That is not a good day for the state, as Legal Insurrection points out. So again, it was just a very, very bad day for the prosecution. The reason that I'm pointing this out is because what you're hearing from the media is that that if Chauvin doesn't get convicted, it's a referendum on American racism. Cops are all bad. Fewer cops on the street. You think this isn't going to backfire? It's going to backfire. It absolutely will backfire on the left, because all they would have to do is say, listen, we're going to look at the facts of the case, and we have a jury system for a reason. They can't do that. They have to say that this is deep American racism, regardless of whatever the evidence shows. And again, it wasn't just that it went badly for that state's witness. There's another state's witness, MPD Officer Nicole McKenzie, who's the medical support coordinator. According to Legal Insurrection, McKenzie did really poorly. On direct, the prosecutor had McKenzie testify about how officers had a duty of care to suspects, that Chauvin had CPR and other training that would qualify him to provide emergency care, and that such care must be provided by the officer, even if an ambulance had already been called. Isn't it true, Nelson then asked McKenzie, that you train officers to consider not just the suspect, but the totality of the scene? She said yes. Isn't it true that police officers have a competing duty of safety to themselves, partners, bystanders, paramedics? To the point that if the scene is unsafe, if the officers haven't already announced a code 4 all safe, EMTs will stage a distance away until they are told safety has been achieved? Yes, said McKenzie. Isn't it true safety concerns might not come from the suspect, but from the crowd? Yes. Okay, and by the way, the mob was there shouting at, that's why we have tape, shouting at Chauvin the entire time, which prevents the EMTs from getting it. All of this generates at least a picture of reasonable doubt. All of this pictures at least the possibility of reasonable doubt. So it's, none of this is going particularly well for the state. And if this results in more riots, if this results in more calls for the end of policing in America, it ain't going to go well for the left either. The left is overreaching on every area in American life right now. You knew it was coming. It is coming. And the backlash is going to be extremely strong. Facts don't care about your feelings, and it's a fact that The Ben Shapiro Show is the largest conservative podcast in the nation. Be sure to hit the subscribe button to stay up to date on all of our content.